Hey listeners, it's Paul Andriola here. Why not join our community at Small Cap Discoveries, where we offer our members direct access to some of the best microcap investment opportunities available. Our members are getting access to premium microcap financings, research reports, and direct access to management. Sign up today at www.smallcapdiscoveries.com.
All right. Welcome, everybody. It is August 1st, 2024, and today we are here interviewing Patrick Blott, CEO of Intermap Technologies. Intermap trades on the TSX under the symbol IMP. Trades around 65 cents with 42 million shares outstanding, or roughly a $28 million market cap. Patrick, thank you for joining us today. Intermap's a company that we've been watching for a number of years, but only had the opportunity to really speak to you a couple weeks ago, and would love for you to sort of introduce the company and present it to our audience here. So I'm going to just hand it over to you and let you run with it.
Terrific. Well, thank you everyone for joining in. Paul, thanks for the introduction. I'm also going to mention just quickly, ITMSF is our U.S. exchange listing as well. So we're listed in both places. The primary listing's on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Intermap is, I'm Patrick Blott. I am the CEO of Intermap Technologies, and I've been CEO for about 6 years. Just by way of background, prior to Intermap, I was executive chairman of another geospatial company called OSI Geospatial, also for a while publicly traded on the TSXV, focused on maritime domain awareness. Intermap, by comparison, is focused on terrain. Land and sea. And so I've been in this industry for about 15 years. And then prior to that, I worked in infrastructure, but always on government regulated at that intersection of commercial and government, particularly where dual use, both in terms of contracts or technology, create business opportunities, and that's been an interest of mine for a long time. And Intermap, as we'll talk about, is right in the sweet spot of that. So, I guess just at a high level, we have a deck up here. We'll go to the first slide. Intermap is a geospatial intelligence company, and we have, what that means is we provide location information. We do it at very large scale. That's where our sweet spot is. That's what we're particularly good at. We've been doing it for a very, very long time. Intermap can trace its history well over 100 years. Initially as a targeting company for the Army, through various evolutions. It was the first company to ever put a camera on an airplane and go and look for mapping and terrain from the sky, and then it built some of the first maps, and it built some of the first digital maps after that. And it's a long history of innovation. What you're looking at in this presentation, importantly, is Intermap data. We are 3D specialists. We create 3D elevation data. So the terrain, features on the terrain, and it's all in very high resolution, 3 or multi-dimensional. And that's really important. I should say right out of the bat, almost all of our customers, nobody looks at Intermap data. They use Intermap data points, and those points feed into typically algorithms, workflows, but it's the coordinate data. That's what that is. That's a rendering of all those points. Those are super accurate, super high resolution, and then you can take a picture, maybe from space or a plane or whatever, but you can take an image that we're used to, snap it with your iPhone, an optical photo. You can drape it on Intermap data points, so you can put a satellite overlay on top of that, and you'll be looking at something that has immaculate ground truth. So now you can render it and look at it. Most of our users don't. Most of our users just need the points, and they just need the points into their workflow. Next slide. And we have two, markets that, as we define them, government and commercial. And increasingly, both are subscribing to those points as a service. That's a really important evolution, both for Intermap specifically, and eventually through the industry. We are pushing that adoption. the idea that, hey, instead of going out there and buying large dumps of data by the square kilometer, it's way more valuable for our customers to acquire points. And our proposition is to sell them points that they need and then add value to those points. And that business model is a super high business margin business model for us. It's very, very high growth because it enables all kinds of applications and use cases. And it's increasingly getting adopted in a big way. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Oh, we're going the wrong direction. There we go. Next slide. So our first customer segment is governments. Our data set that we provide, and we are an integrated company. We operate sensors, exquisite sensors, proprietary technology, the sensors, the platforms that the sensors ride on, most commonly jets, high altitude jets. But it's also drones, it's also satellites, but the sensors are a core technology. And we collect the data and then we process product from the data. And then we help evolve those into applications and use cases for the data. So we're vertically integrated. Governments need that data for their authoritative base map. And we are at a country scale, at a global scale. The use cases are many, but they're very important. They have to do with, managing natural disasters, land use planning, sovereignty, figuring out borders, figuring out resources and national assets, and policy formulation. Next slide. And I just want to give you another quick look in terms of if you take a picture, let's say from an airplane or from space, that's a two-dimensional shot on the left. That's a screenshot of imagery. In that case, it's satellite imagery. On the right, that's a screenshot just for to give you a visual construct of what Intermap data is like and how it's different. What you notice immediately on the Intermap data on the right, one, that's 3D. So it's not a two-dimensional picture. That is native 3D. It's super accurate. Number two, in some of those patches, you don't have any obstruction from atmospherics, and that can be cloud, that can be rain, that can be day, that can be night. You don't have any obstruction from things like foliage, a jungle obstruction, leaves, moisture precipitation in a rainforest. Those obstructions melt away with our sensors. And then finally, you could count tree stumps. And we do have algorithms that do just that on the picture on the right. And you cannot even see some of those forests because of the clouds on the picture on the left. So that's a very important distinguishing feature of Intermap data. It's exquisite 3D, but it goes right through to the ground, in some cases through the ground. It's not inhibited by atmospherics or difficult terrain. And it gives you that very important 3D rendering in data form that you can use to solve a lot of problems, whether that's smoke, forest fires, hurricanes, all kinds of different use cases there. Next slide. And recently, as a major endorsement of Intermap's revitalized technology and business model, again, it's this idea that we have evolved, which is selling points and making data useful. And we have a very vibrant commercial business that's a high double-digit grower, particularly in insurance, where we have major admitted carriers using our data to underwrite risk, i.e. price their premium right at the front end of their process. They're using this exquisite data. And as a validation of that, we just won this major program in Indonesia to help them reformulate their base map. But the ultimate objective is to help them commercialize this data product that we're going to create for them. Because there's emerging use cases in Southeast Asia for our customers on the commercial side, but also internally for them among their different government departments. And so we've proven out on the one side how people are getting value from buying points, and on the other side, if you take just one example, insurance is a big commercial market segment of ours. The combined ratios there, which is how our customers measure their profitability, is some of the highest, some of the most profitable in the industry. Like 93, 100 is break even. And if you look at North America, we have a very vibrant market. Europe is now growing at twice the rate for us. By the end of this year, it'll be bigger than our North American market probably. And that protection gap in Europe in terms of private insurance, private flood, is in the U.S. it's maybe a gap of 70% uninsured. In Europe, it's more like 75-80% uninsured. Yeah, and that business as a result is growing twice as fast for us. And if you go down to Southeast Asia, that number jumps to 85-90% plus. And all of it, the constraint is the data. And so when we're able to feed in exquisite data into that problem set, our customers, in Hurricane Irma, which was in state of California recently last year, our customers lost zero. Like that was $1 billion event in terms of catastrophe loss, but not for our customers. So when you can feed exquisite data into that, it's having an impact, major impact financially. People want it. And so we got hired by Indonesia. Their one map program is to map the entire country of Indonesia. Our first contract award is for the first 10%, the island of Sulawesi. And that's a $20 million deal for us, which for Intermap's important. I mean, our revenue last year was 6. So that's a step change. And that's a 12-month, that will realize that revenue. So that's a big deal. That's a big step forward. Next slide. And then importantly, they've got the rest of the country to do behind that, and we're spec'd in. So this was a long process of selection. We won it, and so that 20 is over the next 4 to 5 years is going to become 180 million, and that's a very big, important both endorsement of the technology, but also step change in terms of the business and its scale, and then also the market opportunity on the commercial side of our business that falls out of that as we start to make this exquisite data available. Next slide. And this is just an illustration of that. This is Asia's protection gap, and you can see that they have climate and other factors, especially a country like Indonesia, which is an island country. They're impacted. Their capital city sinking into the ocean, and they're impacted severely by these, climate and other trends. And you can see the losses, and you can see the insurance in the blue, and they have very little coverage because it's very hard to underwrite when they don't even have a close handle on sovereignty and which islands they own, and all of that needs to be mapped. It needs to be understood. That's what we're being hired to help them achieve. Next slide. And we're on programs right now in Malaysia, similarly, Colombia, the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, in the United States, and then increasingly OCONUS, which means outside the United States with USGS. And so we have a very robust, vibrant pipeline. In addition to Indonesia, it's very important with Intermap to understand that. In terms of the last number of years, since COVID, that pipeline has grown over 50%, and it's sizable now. And the conversion of that pipeline in terms of the percentage that converts has doubled. So the pipeline's a lot bigger, and the conversion rates into actual revenue from that pipeline is a lot higher. The filters are a lot better. The people driving this revenue opportunity is better, and the products that we're offering are much more in demand than they've ever been. And we can talk about, but underneath it all, the key is selling this concept of useful points. If I'm going to spend a lot of money, I'm gonna create data. I want to get the most bang for my buck out of that. We estimated, Intermap flew Alaska for USGS about 8 or 10 years ago, and that economic benefit was like 3 to 1 at the time was the estimate. But today, easily those estimates are more like 8 to 1 in terms of the impact. And as the commercial markets evolve, that number just increases more. The payback periods have gone from 5 years to a year and a half, 2 years on capital investment for the kind of data that we create. This is from the government perspective. So these are really important trends that are favoring Intermap right now. Next slide. And then on our technology, we're a dual use company. So that means we use regulated tech that we developed in partnership with the Defense Department. And that has a couple of advantages. One, we get to see forward requirements. We get to see the state of the art. We get to take a global perspective on technology because they have to. And number two, we also get to funding for our technology refresh. We're a trusted partner. We get to commercialize this military spec technology as we develop it, our scientists with theirs. And that gives us a very, very strong moat in the commercial market, because if you're not working in this customer set, then you're not seeing the forward requirements. Number one, you're not working with the top scientists on the hard problems that are global problems. Number two, and you do not have the permissions that you need to be able to do the kind of work that we do and create the data and then distribute and make that data available. And you're not allowed to do it if you don't have those permissions, because it's military spec data. Next slide. Flood risk assessment, really important. As I said, Intermap plays the important part of this industry, which is the front end underwriting and pricing of premium. So if you get the pricing of the premium right, and you can do that if you understand the risk metrics around what you're trying to underwrite properly, and you can do that if you have top shelf data. That's what we're providing. But more than that, one of the things that we've done, one of the important, again, innovations that Intermap exclusively is responsible for, which is why we've made such penetration into this market, is we said, look, it's not good enough to require customers to have GIS experts and GIS teams and be up a curve on GIS in order to use exquisite data. That doesn't foster adoption in commercial markets, because they're not like governments, and they don't have the same budgets, and they don't have the same time horizons, and you can't approach those markets the same way. For our customers in the commercial space, what we are doing, the value that we're providing, is we're adding value to the points that they get, in particular by making them easy to consume. So our customers in the insurance sector, as an example, they don't need to become GIS experts, and they don't need to hire GIS experts. They get a score, they get an easy button, they get to tap top shelf data in a way that feeds into their workflows. We don't tell them how to underwrite, because they know how to do that, but we do tell them how to best consume this data, and we do help them fit it into the workflow so that they get the answers that they need. So that's a really important, and we do that case. We take that sort of rifle shot approach, sector by sector, industry by industry. We've expanded scope in insurance, and now we're moving into claims, and we're moving into property. We partnered with large players like Royal Haskelley to have the customers in those segments, and we're pushing the data scope wide and downstream, and we're expanding in this market. And so that's how we approach it, as opposed to sort of saying, this is how you should change your business. We're saying this is how this exquisite data can feed into your business without changing too much about how you already do things. Next slide. And then this is the climate resilience. So Ernst & Young, Royal Haskelley, and others, when a disaster strikes, there's a huge need for data. And there's a huge need for analytical models, both in terms of flood models. Intermap had one of the world's first ever global patented flood models. We are very good at that. And we feed this stuff in a way that, again, is very sensitive to how people are using it and making it easier for them to consume this data without being an expert in what we do. Next slide. Navigation, another important use case. If I go back to the work we've done with the US government, I would say 70% of the quote unquote economic benefit is navigation related, and specifically around avoiding mistakes, whether that's flying instruments into terrain and crashing planes or helicopters, or that's sending things remotely and having them go where they're not supposed to be. But the navigation problem is a really important problem set. We're really good at it, and we're feeding this. We have the only globally certified data set, which we did in partnership with Lufthansa for the airline cockpit, the commercial airline cockpit. And this is a really important high-growing use case. It touches, we have customers in the drone space, beyond line of sight drones, navigation, doing commercial applications like package deliveries. We also have military customers that are using it for nav systems on board helicopters. And this is a really important, very valuable use case for our exquisite data, which they can tap anywhere in the world for these problems. Next slide. Specifically, I just want to highlight for people, this is a visual. And again, our data feeds systems. So instrument nav systems, for example, it's bits and bytes in the instrument nav systems. Nobody's looking at the picture, but the computer is. But this is what a computer looks and sees if they have lousy data in the top screen. This is a real life use case. Black Rock Island, a couple of years ago, rescue a helicopter in a storm. Navigating a search and rescue, and they slammed into Black Rock Island and killed the entire crew on board. And that was, controlled flight into terrain. The instrument system on board guided them into that crash, and that's because the data that was feeding into that system, saw the picture that you see on the top half of that screen. And when you feed Intermap data into the same system, you see the bottom part of that screen, and there's a 50-meter difference in terms of what's real and what's rendered. And you'll hear that theme a lot in our industry: real versus rendered, synthetic versus hard point data, simulation, gaming. Right? We play into gaming and sim, but we play into gaming and sim because they want to use reality capture. Not by rendering fake points. So the top of your screen is rendering fake points, people die, and the bottom of your screen is hard point real data, 50-meter difference, and with that data, you don't crash the airplane into the side of the mountain like it's what happened there. Next slide. And this also, similarly, we have a very fast-growing customer segment with one of the most important communications satellite communication companies out there right now, and RF propagation, managing and measuring signal, particularly around ground stations and signal interference. And again, it's our data. You can't really do it properly without the exquisite data. But then we go to the next step, and we provide them not just the data, but we provide them the useful points, so that they can actually, those points have been value added, and they can use that data to solve specific use case problems. And then it becomes a growing business. And this particular customer, just to give an example, we started working with them maybe a year and a half ago. 3 or 4 site proof of concept. I think they're up to a dozen at least now. We're getting orders from them, and they're expanding that program just about every month now. So that's a really important win for us. Next slide. I talked a little bit about helicopters and nav systems, but it's the same with the terrain. So if you're flying point to point, you're not going to an airport, then you have a problem if you're going to land in a place you've never been before. In this case, helicopter landing zones. We're very good at that, and it's very important when you're deploying either in a military context or in a drone context for things like a package, that you understand the landing zone or the drop zone. And that's the problem set, that we have global scale data everywhere in the world, and it's precise, which means if you pull a point in Jakarta or Toronto or New York City, that is the same point. It's the same specification around that point, so it can feed into the automated systems. It's not discretely collected by different sensors, different times, different places. It's a highly precise global point, and you can use it for these kinds of problem sets. Next slide. And then just from a business model perspective, again, when we shift to selling useful points, it becomes a very scalable, high operating leverage, highly automated business model. And that's showing up in our financial metrics. We're now at least 60% recurring revenue on software subscription, with double-digit CAGRs in North America and Europe, and stay tuned for Asia because we're deploying there right now. And so, the wind's at our back in this regard, and the biggest sort of step change, in addition to refreshing the technology and engaging with DoD to do that on these technology applications, but in addition to refreshing the technology, which then feeds into better data, it's also about how we're selling this data and how we're making it accessible to non-expert users. Next slide. And here's the financials, just top level anyway. We're guiding $16–18 million on the top line for this year. And, that's a step change for Intermap, and this is an important inflection point. And then that dip obviously is through the COVID period. Next slide. Same numbers, different format. Next slide. I should mention that we are EBITDA positive now. So from a cash and from a management perspective, in terms of how Intermap's operated, and we're a technology company first. Everything we do is around scale. Everything that we do is around increasing automation and particularly the speed, reducing latency. We have very highly educated, mostly long tenured, employee base, and the motivation in the employee base is very much around not just solving problems, but having a long-term perspective on how we solve those problems. We run lean. Lean at Intermap means that our really, really smart people are working really, really hard on stuff that they're very engaged in. It doesn't mean we have a bunch of mediocre people, counting pennies, and that's not how working 9 to 4:30. Our people are working 24/7 around the clock. They're stretched, but there's a lot of operating leverage in the business model as a result. Next slide. And this is a terrain model. So another very important aspect of Intermap and what we do and sell is the foundation stack of our data. No matter what you layer on top, that could be a cell phone signal, it could be a demographic, it could be ship movements, anything. It starts with terrain, like the bare earth. All the features, both man-made and non-man-made, are removed, and our sensors penetrate that earth. So it's a very precise ground truth foundation. And then from the foundation, from ground truth, we can layer in data. And as long as the errors on the foundation, the terrain model, are really, really, really small, then the errors throughout the data stack are really, really, really small. If there's large error in the foundation, then that error gets magnified exponentially as you move throughout the stack, to the point where the top layers start to become useless. And just to give you a sense, our insurance underwriters will have 130, 150 layers stacked. So if you have bad ground truth at the foundation of that stack, by the time you're using the top layers, they're useless. So an important capability of Intermap, an important core asset of Intermap is having the globe, the terrain of the globe, on a bare earth at a very high resolution specification. Next slide. Orthorectification here, just using a satellite. We're penetrating heavily into space. We've been hired in last year by NASA. We're working on their Artemis 3 program. We've been hired by a terrestrial space company on the commercial side. one of the biggest ones. We have been hired by the Air Force to advance their GPS-denied navigation, which will migrate into the satellite program. And just to give you a quick idea, I showed you initially those buildings with the data points. That's on the left when you drape a satellite image on top of them. Now you can look at those buildings on the left, and you can pick the 34th floor of that building, and you can have a very high level of confidence that you know exactly where that is in space because it's sitting on very exquisite underlying elevation data. And on the right, that's using either no data, free data, lousy data, your satellite image, which comes down from space in 2 dimensions. They'll orthorectify it typically at a level 2, 300 processing, maybe with a 30 or 50 meter elevation model so that it doesn't look as bad as what it looks like on the right, but it's still not going to be right for most use cases. So that's really part of Intermap's edge is when you look at the picture on the left, if you want to look at data, you know you're looking at reality. Next slide. And we talked about the dual use. We talked about the elevation library, which Intermap has the largest commercial library in the world, and it's available globally. Next slide. It runs on proprietary technologies, particularly the processing technology that allows us to pull in source data from multiple different sensors that can sit on. We care about sensors, you know, whether that's a LiDAR sensor, a radar sensor, optical sensor. But we care a lot about the sensors, and then we look to the platform that they're on, depending on what the problem set is that needs to be solved. So sometimes that's on a drone. We're on contract right now to use drones, exquisite sensor on drones. You know, drones is the right platform for that. Sometimes it's on a satellite. And, you know, we'll use a satellite where that's appropriate. And sometimes it's on an airplane. So platforms is second. But the real art of what Intermap does really, really well is be able to take these different sensors from these different platforms and ingest them into creating this global elevation model at a very exquisite specification. And that's the difference between sort of the left screen and the right screen there, just to give you a visual illustration of that. Next slide. And that rests on a patented technology, very important technology, and a bunch of different workflows behind that support it. And then, of course, AI/ML is a very important buzzword, something that Intermap's been doing for a very long time. Just to give you an idea, when I started at the company 5 or 6 years ago, we had maybe 280 people working in Southeast Asia. That probably 2 or 3 years ago now, our machines and the algorithms, they're way more accurate, they're way faster. Those 280 people are now less than 10, and they're way more productive, they're faster, and they're doing better quality work. So when we think of AI/ML or any of these technologies, it's really about how that either improves the quality of the data that we're providing to people, which we can charge more for, or reduces the time it takes, the latency for them to consume that data, because a lot of use cases need to be very close to real time. And so we feed those technologies into improving those 2 metrics. Next slide. And I think that's it for the presentation part of this, Paul.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patrick. Reminder, everybody, if you got some questions you'd like me to ask Patrick, please use the chat function and we'll ask the question. Patrick, I mean, just from grand scale, you know, we talked about some of the contracts you guys have right now. It gives you a bit of sense of size and scope, but what truly is the addressable market here? How big could this market be for this kind of data?
Yeah, so and there's a lot of studies on this, so it all depends on obviously how you define it. 75% of all, if you take up all private sector commercial revenue in the world, 75% of it has some sort of tie-in to location intelligence. Now, whether that's a pizza delivery person using a Waze, which we provide data to Waze, for navigation purposes, or that's a travel agent trying to figure out logistics for your trip to to Greece. Like there's a whole that's a very broadly defined metric, but having more location intelligence improves many, if not most, businesses out there. So there's a very big economic impact from that perspective. We don't get lost in those weeds. The way that we approach it is we say, look, we have a couple of core capabilities here, and we want to pick our spots. We want to go very deep into those spots. So we picked insurance as one. We have maybe 2, 3, 4% penetration into the insurance catastrophe modeling and analytics market. And we have a lot of room to grow there, both geographically and in scope, as I described a few minutes ago. And so that's a place we want to play. We're bringing tools to that problem set that no one else can do. So we picked that. Navigation is even bigger, and that breaks down to the government side, which government is typically 3x commercial in terms of spend, but that's we're talking in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Like those are huge markets. So we have a sliver of that too, but where we're working, no one else can. They're coming to us for commercial, both R&D and data and experience, because it's the only place they can get it. They can't do it themselves. We have an archive that's based on 100 years of history that covers the globe. And we have data nobody has, and we have ways to use it that nobody's thought of, and we can apply it jointly with the U.S. Defense Department to solve a really major problem, which is how do we operate in a world where people are wrecking our GPS signal, and they're wrecking it on weapon systems, and they're wrecking it on nav systems for airplanes, they're wrecking it up in space, it's vulnerable, and just about every consumer app, including the iPhones, dependent on it right now. So that's a big problem, and we're helping them find alternative pathways around operating in what we call GPS-denied environments. So there's a lot of money to be made there. We start out small, and we evolve our contract with the Air Force, which we have alluded to in our public statements. It's getting upsized right now, but it's getting upsized in a big way, not a small way. And it's on a pathway to becoming what we hope will become program of record. So the life cycle there is prove a prototype, prove it works, then get it adopted into the use case, and then blow it out into the entire services on the program of record where the big dollars are. We're on the program of record. We announced last year that we were selected for the Advanced Battle Management System, ABMS, which is a $1 billion U.S. Air Force contract. So we are qualified for those dollars. We're in that market. Now we have to get out what we're doing with the Air Force to a stage where it can then feed into that program of record, and we can tap the bigger dollars.
Gotcha. Fair enough. And then just the competitive landscape. There are clearly other companies out there doing something similar, but how do you guys fit within that competitive landscape?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, what we do so unique and different that we don't see exact competitors, but we do bump into different groups for different things. If you go to Indonesia, and what was so cool about that program for a whole bunch of reasons, but they did an open procurement and an electronic procurement bulletin board, and you can go there and you can see all the bids, you can see all the prices, you can see who bid. And there's a list of competitors right there, most of them local. I should emphasize that Intermap's key capability is that we operate at country and global scale. We are not, you can walk into your backyard with your iPhone and take a picture of a blade of grass and probably get a lot more detail than anybody's going to get from any other place because it's in your backyard on your iPhone. But we're operating at massive scale. And so when smaller companies, do ground survey or use low altitude airplanes or drones or whatever, easier sensors like optical, LiDAR, they'll show up and compete for certain things, but they'll never beat us in our market, which is a large scale. Like nobody can beat us in Indonesia because we're doing the whole country. They can't compete with that. And so you'll see subsets, what I would call kind of sub-competitors, and it's typically around small scale. And that's both on the application side. If my problem set is a city block, the application side in terms of rendering, in terms of data collection, you'll see all kinds of players, a whole variety. But in terms of global scale, 3D, living, breathing elevation model, available on demand within a fraction of a second, points anywhere, I really can't think of anybody who can do that.
Perfect. And then just generally, your business model, you touched on the fact that roughly 60% of your revenue is recurring. Why don't we explain a little bit more how you guys get paid, how, what size of contracts, like the length of contracts, things like that. Just generally, what's the business model in terms of how you get paid?
Yeah, great. And I think a couple things I got to say about that, because on the one hand, it's pretty straightforward. It's a subscription, almost like a software-like business model. But on the other hand, there's some very, very important nuance to it because we are a data company and we're feeding products. So I like to think, Intermap is like, I was around in the days when we underwrit some of the first, at a fund I was at 20 years ago, some of the first software companies that went out eventually became public, eventually became really big. And they said, look, I can go and do software services into big institutional government players. Think of, like, if you're in Canada, like a Terranet also was owned by that fund. That's a really important flavor of software license, because it's not just the software and the features and the point and click. It's also what feeds into the software. It's like Netflix, except you're making the movies as well. And that's what we're like. We have this exquisite data. There's no alternative use, but we're selling it through that model, which is a multi-year subscription in most cases now. Starts out as a 1 year and then evolves. Most of our customers have evolved onto multi-years, and we're adding new ones all the time. But that is becoming a big part of the business, where they've signed up for multiple years. And then within that, they're acquiring data as well. So they have usage caps. So we can make money both ways. We make money on the subscription. We make money on the duration of the subscription. We make money on the usage caps. Some of them, blow through their caps pretty quickly because they become super heavy users pretty quickly. And then we make money on upsells as we improve the features and get them more tailored and specific to their particular problem set, which often, like I said, make those points valuable. So we're adding value to the points. So we're making money for those upsells as well. So there's a whole life cycle of the account. It's not just, hey, sell them a subscription, see you later in a year or 3 years. It's a constant engagement of upselling, managing usage, increasing usage, broadening scope, and then extending. And no one's ever reduced. They're always building. So it's a very cool business model. And just to put a metric around that, and I'll give this metric now. I gave it at the AGM, and we will start to publish it. But a typical software company might have a 1 to 3% leakage in terms of their software a month, and Intermap's is 1, maybe 2% a year. So it's just extremely sticky, a low churn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. And like, if for investors' sake, how do we model out your gross margin? Like how stationary is the gross margin? I imagine as you scale, or you get more, sort of, call it the subscription and recurring revenue, does that change your gross margins?
Yeah, because there's 3 things happening, right? There's that organic business which we built and we've now proven out, right? There's an existing customer set which is now and before COVID, that was 85% of the business. and the recurring was 15. Now the recurring 60%, and that's 40%. That existing customer set is adopting and migrating over. And so what might have been repeating business is becoming recurring software business. And then the third thing that's going on is we signed up recently the state of California. They're in a mess with fires and flood, and they need solutions, and they've gotten past the point of having to worry about all the the nuance of it, and they're like, we need stuff that works. And so now they're on a 2-year. Like, that's a big step forward. We now have a state government, an important state with a big problem, subscribing to this stuff. So they're taking the data as a service, and that model is now getting adopted by governments. They hired us because they're interested in doing that. That's going to happen in a big way. So that will become, I am 100% certain, the future of this industry. Now, our job is to try and play as much in that as we can. But if we jump forward 5 or 10 years from now, there's so much source, and it's coming from so many places. If you are like an intelligence agency or a Defense Department person or a civil person trying to figure out, FEMA or flood or disasters or urban planning, you're swimming in source. You've got dozens of commercial space, dozens of different collection, and their problem has changed. And the problem is, how do I get the most useful points to help me to answer these questions? And they're all going to be taking it as a service in order to do that. They're going to effectively be outsourcing that challenge, and so that they are no longer swimming in all this source that they don't get any value from. So when you ask me that, we're now 60% of our commercial business. Indonesia's hired us with a plan to do that. So it'll increasingly become more and more of our business as the existing customers grow, the legacy customers migrate over, and the new customers adopt.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit more about sort of the capital market side of things. You just raised some money right now. What's the capital going to be used for?
Yeah, so we're deploying. I talked a little bit about Indonesia. That deployment is underway, and so that's a very important thing. There's a lot that goes into a national mapping program, and a lot of heavy lift, particularly upfront heavy lift. So we raised some money to fund upfront heavy lift in that, and that involves sending people into the field. That involves getting sensors calibrated, getting platforms certified and insured and deployed, moving everybody halfway around the world, starting the operations, building out locally to do that in terms of the field crews, getting the permits. I mean, there's a laundry list, right? So this is not an everyday working capital draw. So we raised some money to do that successfully. We set out a target. We had to upsize that target to accommodate, and so we've done that, and we've closed. I think we announced the first closing. I think the announcement for the second went out today, if not today, tomorrow morning, before the open. And so we've achieved our objectives there with that fundraising, and that's the use of proceeds in terms of mobilizing Indonesia, number one. Executing on an upsized Air Force contract, which is happening in parallel. Number two, Intermap's really, really busy right now. And then number three, we have some other stuff in the insurance in terms of a major win there. Our one of the great surprises for me in the last year with Intermap, we had a push into Europe. What we didn't understand well was just how sort of desperate that insurance gap was there in the need. And we started with large customers, whereas in the United States, we started with the specialty customers, the smaller insureds. And the uptake and the adoption in Europe has just been unbelievable, to the point now where it's going to surpass our US business literally in the span of 24 months by the end of this year. So there, we raised a little capital to put more muscle behind that as well.
Mm-hmm. And do you envision a need for more capital, or do you think this might be it?
No, this will be it. Because so you asked me earlier in terms of financial metrics. We did put out guidance for the year. We guided 16 to 18 million dollars of revenue, which we're sticking to that guidance. And that guidance is on, from a $6 million base last year. And we guided a cash flow margin of 25% on that. Now, that is an understated margin. That's a corporate margin, but it's understated in terms of call it the operating basis of the company, because we have these startup drawdowns, right? Which is what I just raised capital for. And those startup drawdowns are going to feed into the way we account for it and everything else. Those will hit the margins initially. So those are what I would characterize as a very conservative. They're not anywhere near the steady state margin of the business, which is easily twice that as we ramp up. And so you're going to see upside to the margins. You're going to see upside to the revenue, because we're 10% in just Indonesia alone. And they're going to award probably by the first quarter of next year the follow-on. And there's upside to the revenue just with that project, but also with the stuff we're doing with the U.S. government, and also with the stuff that we're doing in insurance and in drone land, in commercial, and the space, which I mentioned earlier as well. So there's upside to revenue, but there's also those revenues, those commercial revenues, carry a software-like margin. You don't see it because of our public company costs and our operating leverage at the moment, but you're going to start to see that. And as people adopt those subscription, sales, you're going to see that margin expand.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, Patrick, 42 million shares outstanding prior to this financing you just did. Maybe give us a breakdown, insider ownership, and any other significant sort of shareholders in the company.
I'm the largest shareholder with approximately 15% of the company. There are a couple hovering around, sub 5. And then there's no one larger than that. So we're pretty broadly held. We have a fairly, at least the ones that are engaged, a fairly sophisticated ownership base of people who understand the sector, people who understand, have done work on our name. The crawl, walk, run for Intermap, we need to get discovered by the institutional, both on the research side and the coverage, and in terms of the investors. We do a lot of work on that. I spend a lot of time doing that. We're going to now, I think, start to see some fruits of that, because that's been an effort. And we needed to get to a scale that makes us investable, right? Because we've been small, but now with Indonesia and all these other things starting to kick in, we're starting to qualify. And so that's going to be upside to both our, I think, valuation and liquidity.
Fair enough. Perfect. And then challenges. What's the biggest challenges you face as a smaller business right now?
Yeah, I think it's any small company has similar challenges, and that is, we put a lot of effort into making sure that we're customer focused. We're everything filters through a dollar and an economic return on capital perspective. And we have to be super disciplined about that, because there are many paths right now for Intermap to grow. And we're laser focused on the ones that are working for us, that are highly scalable, and that have both highly scalable, large dollar, high margin. And so that's a discipline, and that's a discipline I instill in people every single day, because it's easy to get distracted by bright, shiny things. But especially in this industry, and especially in the commercial side of this industry, but we're very, very disciplined about it, and we're customer driven and financially oriented.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got a handful of questions that come in, so wouldn't mind asking right now. We'll jump on these, and then we can sort of ask a couple wrap-up questions. Jennifer asks, she says, just to clarify, your data is not generated real time, question mark. You survey the terrain, essentially provide a map. So if somebody builds a building or moves a large vehicle into an area, that won't show up on your data. How much refreshing of data is there necessary from time to time?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that gets to a bunch of things. It gets to platform, it gets specifically to the customer and the use case and the refresh rate that they require. So what Intermap, there was a time when Intermap did this, what many players in our industry do. They love the field of dreams model, right? Like, I'm going to go build this super cool tech, and then they're going to come. And then I'm going to make this tech even cooler, and then I'm going to get even more. And then what happens is nobody shows up, right? And and that happens. Like, I see that all the time. Intermap's fallen for that before. They went out, they've gone and spec'd data. We don't spec any data ever. But to the question specifically, it's driven by the customer. So we have, I've mentioned publicly the Air Force. I've mentioned NGA. And I think that's all. But there's others, and some will become announced publicly. And those requirements are real-time requirements. They still have the same need for exquisite foundation data. They need not only real-time, but they need the change, and they need the change detection, and they need tip and queue, and that is customer-driven, attached to dollars. It's not hypothetical, let's do this for fun. We can certainly do it. Intermap used to run the ice mission for Canada in the Arctic, and that's a real-time requirement because those icebergs are moving around. And if you're gonna move ships through the Northwest Passage, you have to understand where the ice is. And this is stuff that we do and do well, but we don't do for free. So it's all defined by the customer. So we do that. We are doing that right now, and we will talk more about it.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, a question on competitors, specific competitor. It says, how does Intermap tech differentiate itself from competitors like Hexagon?
Exploitation, right, is an important part of making this industry's data useful. So, and Hexagon's a great company, and particularly in terms of general purpose GIS and exploitation. Where Intermap is very unique is our data stack. So we, like I said, we have a global scale, the only one of its kind in the world. Governments don't have it, of high resolution bare earth foundation data to stack on that can solve very specific types of problems. And then we layer in also exquisite exploitation capability and exploitation software that's driving off of patented processes that allow us to bring in multiple sources, back to the prior question, multiple sources, right? And so we can exploit for particular use cases in a way that no one else can. And then we layer in on top of all of that, this business model and this approach to the business. And that's a really important part too. Well, look, if I go back and I say, okay, let's take insurance as the example. How do you get an insurance underwriter to use high-grade geospatial elevation data? It sounds easy, right? That is not an easy problem at all. And it's that ability to layer in the business use case that makes money on top. It's not the sensor, it's not the platform, it's not how we collect it, it's not how we put it all together, it's not the final data product, it's not even the time frame all of that gets delivered. It's how useful is the point that I'm using, and how much money is it making me, and does it fit my problem? That's the value. So that's a very different approach, I think, than most companies in our sector that we see in terms of how they go to market.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Okay, another question from Russell. Can your alternate GPS solution be interrupted or attacked? If not now, potentially in the future. Is there any way somebody can hack this data or interrupt the flow of data, I guess?
Yeah, the answer is no. and it's being purposely designed for that. So it's being hardened for basically the warfighter standard. And further than that, if you think about what kind of weapons of war need global data, and start with that, and say, okay, of that type, what's your tolerance for error? And the tolerance is just about zero. So what's being created is at a very, very high standard.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll work to wrap up here. This is back to the raise. I've got one gentleman here says, can you comment on the share price? Raise seems to have been done at a discount to market. Who invested? Were there any sort of large institutions or I guess investors of note? And is there any outstanding warrants on the stock right now?
Yeah, we do have warrants. They strike around 80. Some strike at 80. Some strike at $1. And so we do have, I think, in 2 tranches, and they total. I want to be really careful here, but it's in the order of 5 million warrants. And so I think that are the ones that are close to the money. And so I think in terms of participation, it was a high net worth, sophisticated investor crew. It was a mix of new and old investors, and we do have people who are institutional, but not institutional. We have 1 or 2 institutions, specialty funds, that are in the stock. But we do not have a Fidelity or anything like that at the moment, and that's the next evolution of the company, is to get into a place where we have enough depth in terms of the liquidity valuation, in terms of the stock, and just scale, that we can start to qualify for that institutional investor. And at the moment, we're still just a little shy of it.
Gotcha. Okay, this has been great. One question I like to ask CEOs is, what do you enjoy most about running your business? What sort of gets you going about this particular business?
There's a couple things. One, the people are phenomenal. Like this is a really fun company. I mean, it's stressful and it's hard, but it's a very special company in terms of we do not lose. We have zero problem recruiting. Zero. People who get a job offer from Intermap come to Intermap and then they stay. We have had turnover and we've had restructuring. We've had tough choices that I've mostly had to make, but there's not volunteers who want to leave this company, and we have no trouble bringing them in at the front end, because the problem sets that we're working on and the level of science that we're working at is really, really interesting if you are an advanced degree engineer and a scientist and care about some of these global problems. The second thing, so the people are really interesting to work with. And then the problem sets we're working on, they're strategic, right? I like to say Intermap is in places in the world that are evolving, that are becoming, the next big players in their sector. We're empowering our customers with proprietary things that their competitors don't have, so they have an edge. And with our countries that we work with, they're right at that exciting inflection point, and we're enabling all of that. So it's a big deal. It's very rewarding.
That's awesome. And then, okay, so investors like us watching the company right now, what do you think are the most important either catalysts to watch out for, or just business metrics that we should pay the most attention to?
Yeah, I think very importantly, as we make announcements, it's elevation data as a service. Like that is a very big Intermap initiative. It's working. We're pushing it, and customers are loving it, and that's really important. Number 2, I think you're going to start to see the operating leverage kick in, and I think so margins. Like we have growth, and I've announced it, both commercial and government, and we have upside. We have a pipeline. I should say one more thing. Our pipeline now is up 50% from pre-COVID levels. It's in the order of $360 million. We publicized that at the AGM. and I think it's on our website. You can find it. But that's up 50% pre-COVID. But much more importantly, what's happening is the conversion rate is up like 30, 40 points. So it's a much higher quality conversion of what filters through a factored pipeline that ultimately becomes revenue. So watch the pipeline, watch the conversion, watch this scale start to kick in as the company gets bigger and starts to absorb all those public company costs. You're going to see it in their margins. And then finally, and very, very importantly, Intermap's a dual-use company. That's critical to our moat. That's why we do stuff no one else can do. And all of these announcements that we make in terms of how we're working with governments that are helping us both fund that technology development, but also take advantage of the work we've done, bring commercial tech back into the DoD. That dual use aspect's really important. That's our moat. And it's you can't start in the garage in the Silicon Valley. You cannot start in some random place in around the world or in China and compete with Intermap with that moat. It's a very special, important attribute. So keep an eye on that too.
Awesome. That's extremely helpful. And then Patrick, I mean, this has been great. But is there anything we missed, or is there any key message you want to make sure that everybody walks away with today?
Yeah, I think Intermap is like the time is right for us, and we are now with the wind at our back in terms of having some big wins. We're full on execution mode. And I am a huge shareholder in this company for a reason. I participated in the last round. I participated in just about every single round we've ever done, because I'm a big believer that this is a very special company. It has a long history in this industry, but it plays an important role in this industry that's just going to get bigger. So I think it's really important that people understand that this is not just some little niche player that's insignificant. It's working with some of the biggest companies in the world in the sectors that it's choosing to work in. Every one. If it's aviation, it's Lufthansa. If it's insurance, it's Generali. If it's the military, it's the U.S. Air Force. Like, this is a very special company, and now it's got the wind at its back. So it's a very exciting time to be a part of it.
Awesome. Okay, this has been great, Patrick. Appreciate it so much. We've been speaking with CEO Patrick Blott of Intermap Technologies, symbol IMP on the TSX and ITMSF on the OTC. I got it right that time, I think. Patrick, has been great to catch up today, and certainly we hope we'll be able to catch up in the near future and continued success. Congratulations on the progress so far.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.